my name is Duncan Mackenzie, and I'm going to show you how to turn this into this. Here's the image open in Photoshop. If you want to try this for yourself, there are a few versions of this picture floating around, although a lot of them have JPEG artifacts. This one had a better quality than most of them. I found it on the Flickr archive of the San Diego Air and Space Museum. This is a Spitfire Mk1a, and it's in the middle of a takeoff, which is why the tail is off the ground. First, I'm going to change the mode of this picture. At the moment this is a grayscale picture, and that's no good for colouring unless you want to add interesting shades of grey. The most common colour mode is RGB, but I'm going to use LAB. This separates the colour data from the grayscale data, and it works well for colorization. I'm creating a new layer for the colours, and I'll name it Colorization. Colorizing a picture often involves adding a lot of masked layers of colour, but here I'll do most of the work on just one layer. It's a sort of colouring book approach. I'm using the pencil tool to apply the colour outlines, and then what I'll do is fill each area in with the paint bucket. The pencil produces rather ugly, blocky outlines, but that's actually perfect if you want to have regions of colour with precise boundaries, and it's also very easy to fill. I'm setting the opacity to 100%, so I'm drawing with solid colours. I'll start by tracing the lower edge of the sky. I've picked a vivid blue. All the colours are going to be changed later, so I'm not going to worry about accuracy here. I'm using a fairly small brush for my pencil, and I want to trace the lower edge of the sky. I'm shift-clicking here to get a continuous line. And I'll speed up the video here. There's some glass areas here, and I'm going to treat them as if they're invisible and just colour the objects behind them. So I'll do that for the top of the canopy and also for these side windows here. I'll draw a boundary around them, and then those will be filled in blue later on. And some straighter sections here. The tip of the propeller is yellow, and it's almost invisible here. And I have to take this line right to the very edge. When I fill this in, if there's the smallest gap, the colour will flood out over the whole image. So now I'll switch over to the paint bucket tool, the moment of truth, and it worked. Now I'll do the same thing with the foliage. I'll pick a dark green for the trees, and I'll outline them with the pencil. Now I can fill them in with the bucket tool. I'll also fill in a couple of areas of sky on the aircraft window here. There's a little spot of white in there. I'll get that with the pencil. Having different shades of green for foliage can help sell the realism of an image, so I'm going to choose a different green for some of those hedges. The exact shade doesn't matter because, again, it'll be changed later, but I do want different colours for different areas of green. Now I'll select yet another shade of green, and that's just for the grass in the foreground. The Spitfire was manufactured by a company called Supermarine, which built seaplanes. The prototype had floats instead of wheels, and it was a racing seaplane. This was in the 30s, when seaplane racing seemed as futuristic as android wrestling. Articles about the Spitfire always mention that the seaplane version won the Schneider Trophy in 1931. What they don't tell you is that it was the only competitor. More than 20,000 of these planes were built, and they were continually improved and redesigned. A Spitfire from the end of the war could fly nearly 100 miles an hour faster than one from the beginning of the war. Okay, now I can fill the foreground grass regions. For the grass in the middle distance, I'll pick a less saturated version of the same colour. And it's the same process, a series of short shift clicks with the pencil. Here I need to be careful that the colour boundaries join up so there's no space for the colour to leak out. There it is, and now I can fill it in with the bucket. I'll do the same with these other grass areas. Now I'll pick a colour for the distant grass, an unsaturated greeny brown. In this area the sky and trees already form a boundary on two sides, so I just need to draw the boundary between the grass and the aircraft. I'll fill that in. And I'll use the same colour for these fields. Colours for the underside of a plane were chosen to camouflage against the sky. They used all sorts of colours, light grey, light blue, light green. The problem is that the sky is much brighter than a plane, so even a white plane will appear dark if you're looking up at it. It's a bit like trying to camouflage yourself against a light bulb by painting yourself yellow. They did experiments putting bright lights on aircraft. That made them less visible against the sky, but it was hard to generate enough electricity for the lights. British planes used to be painted with the Union Jack, but in World War I they kept getting shot down by friendly fire. The problem was that from a distance the cross on the Union Jack could be mistaken for the Iron Cross on German planes. Or maybe French gunners just hated the British. Either way, the British decided to copy the markings of their French allies with stripes on the tail and circular marks called roundels on the wings. The British reversed the French colours. The French had roundels with blue in the middle and red on the outside, so the British used red in the middle and blue on the outside, and that was fine. It didn't work so well on the tail, though. The French used their flag on the tail with blue at the front, while the British put red at the front, but that just gives you the same French flag flying in the other direction. Anyway, the RAF stuck with it, and nobody talks about where it came from. For the white section of the insignia, I'm going to use a light shade of yellow. For now, it makes the paint easier to see. I'll adjust the colour later on. I'll choose a not very authentic green for the green part of the camouflage. Again, it'll be changed later. The brown and green camouflage scheme on these planes was another French invention, also from World War I. The RAF started using it in the late 1930s. The official name for the pattern was the Temperate Land Scheme, but the colour scheme was usually nicknamed Sand and Spinach. I have coloured the spinach, and now I'll fill in the rest of the sand. This area should be the same colour as the bottom of the plane. I'll fill that in. And I also need a colour to mark neutral or unpainted metal areas. I'll use this blue-grey for that. I'll use that to fill in these small areas where the colour won't be that visible. I wasn't sure what these objects were when I was colouring this. I realised later it's the wheels of another Spitfire in the background. I missed an area of brown under the tail there. I'm using a drab grey-brown for the track behind the plane. And I'll use a darker grey-brown for the tyres. For the shadow under the plane, I'll use a less saturated version of the foreground grass colour, and a bright yellow for the propeller tips and the outer part of the roundel. I'll use the yellow-white from the roundel to colour these identification letters. A dark brown for the pilot's leather helmet, and a lighter brown for the rest of his clothes. One brown should do everything. And for skin, I'm just using a light shade of orange. I'll use a dark grey-brown for the face mask, and I'll use the same colour for the engine exhaust and the propeller. Well, that's the hard part done. I've given distinctive colours to all the regions of the image. In some cases I've deliberately chosen colours that are wrong, but you'll see how easy it is to correct them. This illustration of a Spitfire comes from the Fleet Air Arm Archive. I'm using the eyedropper to pick up the brown from the illustration, then the Magic Wand tool to select the browns on my colorization layer. The Magic Wand is set with Sample All Layers turned off, so it's selecting regions only from my colorization layer. The Contiguous checkbox is also turned off. That means choosing a colour will select it everywhere on the layer. I've set a tolerance of 0, so I select exactly one colour. Sometimes Photoshop can subtly change the colours, so if you find you have problems here, increase the tolerance to 2 or 3. One click on any brown camouflage area will now select all the brown regions, and to fill them I just click Edit, Fill. Now we'll do the same thing with the green camouflage. Eyedropper, select with the Magic Wand, Edit, and Fill. And there it is. I'll do the same thing for the colours on the plane's markings. Yellow, blue, red, white. Now to adjust the grass and sky. For my reference I'll use this photo taken by Adrian Pingstone of an actual grass airstrip in England. I've picked up a foreground colour from the photo and I'll use that to replace the grass colour here. I'll use the same colour but less saturated for the plane's shadow. I'll do the same for the colours of the trees and other foliage. There's the distant grass, hedges, and distant trees. Now I'll switch my colorization layer from normal to colour and let's see how it looks. It's not bad, but I forgot to recolour the underside of the plane. I'll do that now. Sample from the illustration, Magic Wand to select the plane, and fill. That's better. I'll recolour the sky next using a sample from the airfield photo. And fill. I think the grass could stand a bit more green. I could do it using another fill, but using image hue saturation also works well. I'll also use hue saturation to adjust the other grass areas and to take the blue out of the metal areas like the wheel hubs. Now I'll add a new layer and I'll call it Touch-Ups. The picture is getting close, but that grass doesn't look natural, it's too green. Looking at this real picture, you can see the grass has a lot of brown in it. So I'll lift the brown and paint some on my grass. I'll change the Touch-Ups layer to Color Mode and switch to the regular brush tool. I've set opacity to 30% so I can layer the amount of brown I add. And I'm just going to paint over areas of grass using mostly horizontal strokes. Our eyes are very sensitive to greens and yellows. That comes from our leaf-eating ancestors, so you need to spend time on foliage colours if you want the colorization to look convincing. Now for the clouds, and again the easiest approach is just to paint them on. I'll select a cloud colour from my reference photo, and now in the Touch-Ups layer I paint over the clouds. This is speeded up obviously. The cloud colour looks too strong here, so I'm making some tweaks. Only the sky region is selected, so these changes won't affect the brown grass touch-ups on the same layer. I'm using the eraser on 10% opacity to reduce the colour a little more. I'll leave in some of those pinks though. Unexpected colours like that can make the photo more convincing. And finally, the blue and red markings on the underside of the wing are too bright. I'll select those with the magic wand and desaturate them using a hue saturation adjustment layer. I'll name the layer Desaturate Insignia. Because the area is selected when I create the adjustment layer, Photoshop automatically adds a mask here, which is nice. Now I'll select this layer and adjust the saturation downwards. There. And I think that's about it. Here's our starting image again. I overlaid this very simple, almost cartoonish set of colours. A few touch-ups to the grass and sky, tweaked the insignia under the wing, and there's the final result, which I think could probably pass for an original colour photo. A lot of the action has been speeded up here, of course, but in total this took about 90 minutes from start to finish. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.